Can you tell us about how you got started and did you study in a school or self-taught?
Yeah, I did. I went to, I always loved photography, and my dad used to make films, believe it or not, in the day, on 16mm on a Bolex, and you know, the family and stuff like that. And so I was sort of grew up in an environment where photography was kind of quite a big part of it, the weekends, and I became a photographer at an architectural school in London called the Architectural Association, and then we had a visit from one of our patrons, the amazing Richard Buckminster Fuller, the American philosopher, architect, inventor of the geodesic dome, and he was one of our architectural school patrons, and they, because I'd been doing stills there of architectural stills, which I loved, they asked me if I'd be interested in making a film about his visit, and so I jumped at it and made this pretty terrible film, but it inspired me to the point of then going to the London Film School, and so I went to the London Film School and did a 2-year course there, and then ended up getting a grant from the BFI, which is the same as the AFI, to make my own film, which again was a pretty weird film. But the director of the BFI at that time was a fellow called Bruce Beresford, who went on to become a very well-known director who did Driving Miss Daisy and The Black Robe and things like that. And he asked me to be, I was just very lucky, I was in the right place at the right time, and he asked me to be his camera operator on the first movie he got finance for, which was a kind of almost like a predecessor to some films that were made here in the States called Crocodile Dundee. The original version of those was a thing called The Adventures of Barry Mackenzie, which was about an uncouth Australian that went to London. And, you know, they were very low budget, and, you know, but I was a camera operator, and I just got to love it. And then I went to Australia, and I was just lucky enough to be there when the Australian film industry just took off with directors like Peter Weir and Fred Skepsey and all those kind of pretty well-known Australian. Peter Weir made Witness, which is one of my favorite films of all time, and theoretically supposed to be one of the most famous scripts of all time. It's kind of put up on a pedestal as being one of the great scripts of all time, Witness. So I was fortunate enough to sort of grow up in that era, and then I went back to England, and this was when TV commercials were kind of like huge, and Ridley Scott and Tony Scott and Alan Parker and Adrian Lyne and Hugh Hudson and all those soon-to-be become major movie directors were all making TV commercials in Britain, and I got to be camera operator, and then I started lighting for some of them and got to work with some really great British DPs like John Alcott, who shot with Kubrick, and I got asked to, I went for a meeting with Stanley Kubrick who asked me if I wanted to operate on a movie he did called Full Metal Jacket, but it was just at the point when I was asked to shoot my first movie, so didn't get to do that, and just sort of developed from there. And then I came out to the States, and God, a long time ago, 22, 23 years ago, to take over the first Addams Family as DP, and did that, and stayed ever since. And you know, I hated the weather in England so much, a bit like Seattle, that there was no going back. And so I've been in the States ever since, and living in LA, you know, and all kind of started from that. And it's really, you know, so many people ask me, you know, how do I get into the film industry? And it's like the most difficult question to answer. And I think it's exactly what Stephen said, it's just perseverance. And just, just not ever taking no for an answer and just being there. And, it's the only way it'll happen. And there isn't a secret formula. You can be lucky, you can be in the right place at the right time, and there's a certain amount of that involved. Happenstance, I call it. But in the end, it's just hard work. And, I'm not sure whether it's easier or harder now. In some ways, it's harder because of the internet. Everybody thinks they can be a filmmaker. But on the other hand, now you can make films and you can get your work seen at a fraction of the price, which you could never do. You could only dream before about doing it. And I credit my, I'm repeating what Stephen said, I credit my sort of knowledge about photography with an awful lot of time spent in smelly dark rooms and seeing how light interacted with silver. And, it's a sort of process that gets into your head. It's rather like the equivalent of that thing I was talking about, degrees Kelvin and the heat of iron. It's almost like when you begin to understand light and how it works and how it reflects and how it angles itself and how you control it, that's when things start to fall into place for you. And it's just literally perseverance and and being aware, and this disconnect that you have to try and pull off between the eye and the brain is terribly important, I think. To really look at an image without allowing your brain to reinterpret it for you. So that's the short answer.
We're wondering if you can talk a little bit about how inexpensively that scene was shot. We've talked about a lot of the pieces specifically, but if we could maybe review the pieces that were being used and how inexpensive that was. We were using available lighting, correct?
Yeah, it was completely available light. So that's one thing. We had a few expensive pieces. I mean, the glide cam was probably the most effective tool that we used for all of that because it was so dynamic and got in there. And what's that? $399, $499, $499.
Yeah.
And so didn't need to be all that expensive.
And then any gear you could rent as well. I mean, that's what you were talking about earlier. That
you can rent all that.
You can rent all that.
Yeah, all of that's rentable.
This insider we got from Borrow Lenses.
Right.
It was a cheap rent for $100.
About $100 to rent from Borrow Lenses, who supported us with that.
Right. I mean, what Stephen was saying before was it really is possible to make a $500 movie. Everyone, that would have been impossible 5 years ago. And suddenly now it's possible. You can actually do that. And, but it's a lot of hard work, but that's,
Yeah, but that's on you.
Yeah.
It's not about money anymore.
Yeah.
So, you could rent the gear and then get involved at LA Final Cut User Group or the DMA and then just meet people. They cost $5 to go to. You're positive you'll meet an After Effects guy and a post guy. And then, for you guys together, that's $125 each. So
it's all possible, and now you can get your work seen, and there's a lot of self-publicity you can do on the internet.
You guys ready to take some questions?
I think so.
Ready to take some questions, Gail? Okay. I have a question from EcoBach, who would like to know how concerned you would be about the blown out windows in a real shoot, and how would you expose for that shot?
To be quite honest, I think it was about the dance, and I wouldn't really give a damn about the window, because even if I exposed for it, the most you'd see is some chicken wire. you know, a little bit of glass texture, which ain't worth it. And, you know, I really wouldn't worry about it. I would probably tend to limit how much I saw it by, you know, sort of coming around a little bit more. But because we had 4 cameras, and as you can see, some of them were shooting all of you guys too, it was an exercise in terms of dynamics and what you can do with movement with 4 cameras rather than a perfect photographic exercise. And, you know, when you inevitably, if the light source that is lighting the scene is in the shot, it is going to be clipped. There's no way around that, because that instantly creates a dynamic range so great that even on film, effectively you're blown out, because that was the light. It's like you're looking into the light that's lighting the scene, so there's nothing that you can technically do about that on any form of digital or film capture, unless you did some kind of HDR, high dynamic range kind of image capture. And, you know, wouldn't you say? I mean, there's no, it's just, I mean, that's like 10 stops overexposed relative to our wonderful dancing couple. So
You lose the whole look too if you relit it in here.
yeah, so.
Great. Next question is from Cameron. Could Gail talk about how closely he, as a DP, likes to work with production designers during pre-production?
To me, it's kind of like that's one of the most important things of all, because when I read a script and I see something difficult coming up, I go running immediately to the production designer and say, wow, I need some windows in this set, because I know very well the director's going to want to shoot 360, and if I have lights in shot, he's going to get mad, and so on and so forth. So we work very, very closely together, and our production designer on house is a wonderful Scotsman called Jeremy, who I love very much, and we work together really well as a team. Because he often has budget problems and comes to me and says, I haven't got any money for a ceiling, can you manage without a ceiling? You know, even on house, I mean, there's limitations, and especially as we get towards the end of the season where we've spent all the money and, you know, things like that. So it's an incredibly important collaboration to have, and especially over colours and textures of sets. And there's only so far you can go and still have a hospital kind of look like a hospital. I mean, if I had my way, I would love to cover the walls of the hospital in fungus and, you know, sort of dirty it all down and make it look like, you know, people had exploded off gurneys. And,
Zombie invasion.
but it wouldn't quite be house. You know, because you know, sort of sterile, sort of white walls and sort of, you know, pale surfaces and vast expanses of walls, to me, are incredibly boring, and it takes an awful lot of work to kind of get texture out of them, and to then separate the actors from them, so that, you know, you're not sticking people on pieces of white paper all the time, which is an incredibly boring look. And it's one of the reasons why, this sounds really horribly snobby, but 90% or 80% of the movies that you see when you go to the movies, I feel personally aren't controlled all that well in terms of directing the eye, because I think at any time in any movie, in any sequence, in any frame, you should have decided where you want the audience to look, and you do that by controlling the densities and controlling the framing and controlling the depth of field and controlling all those elements together to really focus the eye on what you want the audience to look at. And I think some people just let it go completely, and, you know, instead of me looking at you, I'm sort of thinking, well, that window is really interesting, and it shouldn't be that way. It should, you know, I want to be looking at you, and there shouldn't be anything that's magnetically kind of trying to pull my eye away from that. you know, unless you're making some other kind of statement, but as a general rule, you know.
It's similar to a still shot as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Question from Diner Dog, who had asked, if the footage is too shaky, is there anything you can do in post to lessen that?
We do it all the time. Not so much on the 5D because you can't really go in on the material. If to correct shake, you have to be able to go in, zoom in on the material quite a lot to correct the shake, and then you put tracking markers on certain things, and it'll steady it. We can do it on film, and we always did it on film. And you know, if something happened, you know, like you'd be doing a car sequence and you went over a section of road that was really bumpy, where it tends to fall apart is when you get motion blur within the frame. Then it can actually sometimes look worse. But sometimes you can correct shake quite well, but you have to have a lot of data to be able to do it. And the 5D is right on the edge in terms of you know, how much data you have. So as soon as you start blowing it up, then it'll fall apart very, very fast indeed. So 5D probably not, but Alexa, film, Genesis, you know, Red, probably yes.
But a question from Mark Blake, which is, wants to know about lighting Hugh Laurie's eyes, please. That is one of the best things about House.
Sorry, lighting? Oh, Hugh Laurie's eyes.
Eyes, yes.
Well, he does have beautiful eyes, so I've already got a huge leg up on a lot of actors. I mean, Hugh has beautiful blue eyes, and it's one of the first things I do once I start getting in close on him is to try and get reflection into his eyes. He's an amazing looking man, you know, there are certain angles that I've discovered, particularly with him, that I can use to kind of get light into his eyes, especially, for example, night scenes where he's working in his inner office and he's got a table lamp on and it's reflecting off paperwork on the table. Then I've got an up angle which gives me a really good excuse for getting a reflection in his eyes. And so it's actually not as difficult as it seems. What I really love to do is always to try and get the eye light in from the direction of the key light, as opposed to some people use what they call an OB light, which is just a light literally mounted on the matte box above the camera just to put a sparkle straight in. But I hate that because it just flattens out the image. And I always try and do it from the angle of the key light. Even if that means that he only gets reflection in one eye, it still looks much more natural than just putting something straight flat in from where the camera is. I mean, there are obviously different styles of lighting for different types of shows. I mean, you know, sitcoms typically are much more overlit than you know, dramatic TV shows. I mean, the old adage being, you don't tell jokes in the dark. You want to see every part of an actor's face. When it's a comedy, you want to see that sort of, you know, that kind of look, or that, you know, kind of, you want to see all of that. And so comedies tend to be much more, and sitcoms tend to be much more overlit, and they have formulated lighting that kind of basically is set up on stages that they use all the time, and they rehearse for days, and then they shoot 3 cameras and run the whole show almost as one thing. House is a much more handmade show, and so we work shot by shot or 2 shots by 2 shots, and you know, we have lights in place that we know will probably be used, but we're always moving stuff all the time for a different mood, a different feeling, whereas a lot of sitcoms, they never move the lighting. It just works for everything they do because there's so much of it. And shadows are to be banned, you know. You know, shadows are horrible things, you know, that, you know, create darkness. And, you know, so in the case of House, I do try and put as much mood into it as possible, but given the fact that you're in the reality bounds of a hospital, hopefully that helps.
Absolutely. Question from Bill Walsh, DP. He'd like to know, on the path to becoming a career DP, is it best to gain enough experience independently to join the Cinematographers Guild as a DP, or to climb the ranks of the camera department, or to start in the electrical department?
Wow, that's a really difficult question. That's a really difficult question. I don't think, not all that many gaffers become DPs, a few do. But I think more people become DPs by working their way up through the camera department. Nowadays, I think all bets are off, though. I mean, if you just start shooting beautiful stuff and you get it seen, you're just as likely to have a shot as a cinematographer just by sheer luck and by being there. What you lack by doing it that way is that you will get caught out one day because you'll be asked to do a scene that you haven't got a clue how to do, because you haven't worked with other cinematographers. I mean, just for example, we had to shoot, can't remember the name of the episode, but it was actually scripted that we had to shoot a bull riding sequence in a bull riding arena at 1600 frames a second. And so to do that, I needed something like 6.5 stops of extra light from somewhere. And we needed to shoot at about 4 to give the focus pullers a chance in hell at getting the focus. So basically we had to light to about a stop brighter than sunlight on an interior and a rodeo arena. I mean, that's not a small space, it was a huge space. We used 45,000 amps of power, and we had 2 90-ton cranes and 34 Dino lights that are 36 kilowatts each. And it was like constructing the biggest toaster to toast balls that you'd ever seen. And yet, of course, when writers write that, they're sitting at home sipping a cup of coffee and they write at 1600 frames a second. The bull comes out of the chute with the guy on top of it, and and then it all goes along, and then suddenly the script's accepted, it all goes down the road because nobody really knows apart from the DP what that takes. And then suddenly I've got a screaming production manager on top of me saying, why is it going to cost $80,000 in lighting to shoot this day? And then I have to explain. And, if you haven't had the experience of doing things like that, then you'll get caught out at some point, or you'll need to do some very serious homework very quickly. Luckily, I've been lucky enough to, I operated for 14 years and worked with some really great DPs, and luckily I was able to steal from some of the best. And, I was very lucky, but it's difficult. You might never ever get into those situations. I mean, but sometimes you do get some real tricky ones that are thrown at you, and they just come out of the blue sometimes. Was that the question?
Absolutely. Great answer.
Next question is from Elmer Tenkink, which is, so what is the process when you read a script to create the way to approach the story visually?
I think an awful lot of it is talking to the director, and because I think any film that's worth its salt is really under the captaincy of one captain. It's not a committee. And if you do your job really well, your job is to serve your captain and enable him to make his vision. And it's terribly important to get on his wavelength and understand exactly what he's after in achieving. And so there is no ego involved. This isn't an ego thing at all. It's all about understanding exactly what a director wants to see from this project, because it's unfair to criticize a film if you didn't give a director every single chance possible to actually do exactly what they wanted to do, because they really do have to be a great captain to pull off a great film. And all films are made by directors and writers, and everything else is much less important than that. I seriously believe that good photography is invisible, and I think it's invisible if it's following the arc of the story, and if it's really doing what needs to be done in the script, because I've seen examples of films that were beautifully lit, but it was wrong because the place where, for example, one example, Come See the Paradise, which Alan Parker made, he's a wonderful film director, and I was lucky enough to do the commitments with him. He did Come See the Paradise, but it was just so beautifully lit that it was about the sad story of the Japanese internment during World War II, where Japanese people were rounded up and put in internment camps, and they lost all their possessions and things. And they always shot the exteriors kind of like late in the afternoon or very early in the morning. And to me it looked like, I'd love to go there. It looked great, the way the light shone off the barbed wire, it's so gorgeous. And I think if you blow all your visual abilities at the beginning or anywhere, then you have nowhere to go with it. So sometimes things need to kind of look bland or boring or sort of frightening or threatening, or not exactly ugly, but you need to save your arsenal sometimes for when it's really needed, rather than just making everything look like a commercial. And I think quite a few, God, I sound like a horrible critic. I know, it's just my personal opinion, and that's no more valid than anybody else's, but it's something I felt. And I think you need to read a script so many times to understand the intent of the writer, and then talk to the director to make sure you've got it right and understand what it is they're looking for, and then try and help them execute that feeling. And that's all the things like how you break a scene down, the choice of lenses you might use, and all those sorts of things. So
Great. A question from Prod K, who would like to know what frame rate and shutter speed would you recommend for music videos?
wow, well, if they're singing normally 24 and a 50th, I mean I've seen lots of people do things like sing playback double speed and then shoot at 50 frames or 60 frames and things like that. But if it's real sync, then you shoot at real sync speed. But then it depends what it is and totally the look of it. If you want real lip sync, then you obviously shoot at real lip sync speed or try and simulate that. But I think in music videos, it's probably one area where there really aren't any rules. You can do what you want. I hope I sort of got that question, because it's one area where really all you're making is a visual extravaganza, and selling some interesting music is, I suppose, the point of it. But then I haven't done any music videos for a while, so maybe I'm out of the loop.
Question from Higher State is, earlier when we were looking at the footage, and you talked about the shape of the dancers in terms of, says, what does Gail mean when he talks about shape in terms of light and the performers?
I think, if you're doing something like we did with dance, it's really beautiful to bring out the body form, and I think you do that by back edging it, or at least putting edges on things. I mean, wouldn't you agree, Steve? If you shoot it flat, you create no dynamic to it at all. So I think the shots I really liked that the guys here did that worked best were the ones where you saw body form and you almost create a line drawing by having a hot edge on things, and that exaggerates the body movement, especially when that bright line is against the background and so on and so forth. So I think that's what I meant by that.
I liked all the handheld.
Sorry?
I said I liked all her handheld.
Yeah.
It's a cheap way to go.
Yeah.
Right.
I think you were talking about it earlier, but some folks on the internet are still asking, can you explain exactly what the role of a DP is versus other camera operators?
Well, I suppose, it's obviously director of photography. Basically, it's working with the director to provide the visual content of the film or show or movie or whatever you're involved in. So that's your on paper sort of fundamental role. How you go about doing that is basically working with the director, who hopefully is at one with the writers and understands the writer's intent. And then you have the story, and how you go about selling that story. And what's important is, as I mentioned before, should really be in the director's hands to give him a chance to express himself in the way that he really wants to make his film. And so you become his best ally. You're his best mate, so to speak. And so it's that. But what you have at your command as DP is you have your camera crew that basically help you. You have your camera operator who you basically trust, and your camera crew. You have your electrical crew who helps you with all the lighting and puts up lights where you ask them to, and then you have your gripping crew that basically is all about light control and camera movement and removing walls that might be in the way and so on and so forth. So basically you work as head of 3 departments, kind of, but you're responsible to the director to give him what he needs, and also to one of the most difficult things, of course, these days is, because everything is driven so dramatically by budget and time and money, of course, is to be responsible in terms of time management. In fact, even almost as difficult as the director's job, it is one of the tasks of a director is to be a master of time management, because you can blow all your time on getting hung up on certain shots, and then suddenly you've got no time to complete a major sequence in a day, and schedule is everything on TV. If you get behind, it's terrible, and then that's not much fun at all. So you need to avoid that. So you need to be very aware of telling directors that something he's asked for will take more time than perhaps he wishes to spend on it, and maybe suggest an alternative way of doing the same thing that'll take less time. So constantly you have to be on your feet in terms of evaluating where you are in the day and all of that stuff, and yet hopefully giving the director what he wants, that's kind of mostly it. Most of the time you're not a beating boy, but sometimes you are. One of the things that tends to happen with DPs is that you're the last person to basically hand the set back to the director because you, via the first assistant director, say we're ready. So you can get blamed for taking all the time when nobody has actually been paying attention and realized that other people have, been painting walls or, things have been being repaired or actors are still sort of, in their trailers and things like that. So you've got to be very careful about, making people aware of where the time's going all the time, So it's kind of that, And the roles are very slightly different in TV, which is much more pressure-driven than on most movies. I mean, some movies not. Some movies, work to horrendous schedules, but TV's pretty brutal schedule-wise,
I have a quick follow-on to that. Speaking of schedules, that reminds me of a comment you made earlier today. I think you were mentioning you target to shoot 8 pages a day.
Right.
I'm very curious, and I know the answer is really going to be, it depends, but in general, how much of that is translated, how do I say this? How much real time in the final product does that translate to?
I suppose on average, they count, it's normally about a page a minute.
Okay.
It's a very, very rough average. It can be slower or longer, but that's more or less the way a script is. If it's 45 pages, it's kind of, 45 minutes, thereabouts. The trouble is that most movies and TV things are scheduled just on page count. What people don't take into account is sometimes you have 3 people in 3 different places that are on the telephone to each other. So that means you shoot the scene 3 times. But it still counts as, there's no director in the world that would just shoot, little select pieces. He'll run the whole scene at 3 different places because he'd like to have the ability to cut it the way he wanted later. So you get caught out with scenes like that. You also get caught out with page count when you could have 2 actors in 8 pages, or you could have 8 actors in 8 pages, because all with dialogue, even though it's only 8 pages, you might have 6 times more work because you've got many more actors in it. And, so, a lot of these things aren't taken into account, but it kind of averages out, I suppose, in the end.
How many days did it take to shoot the season finale for last year's season 6?
It was the 5D one.
Yeah.
That was 10 days. We had, normally TV shows are shot in 8 days. It's a theoretical 8 days because we always have an overlap day on house, and so we normally shoot 9 days. One of them's an overlap day where my A-camera operator becomes DP on the other unit. So it's basically 9 days, but in that case it was a 10-day episode. But we had to work very hard to make it happen in that time.
Question from Nada is, what kind of shots are you looking for when you're using the long lens? Is it the extreme face close-up shots, mostly probably out of focus because the people are dancing? Oh, I just lost the rest of the question. My questions document just got a little messed up. But those, I guess, when we were using that long lens, the question was, what kind of shots were we looking for?
I think they might be talking about the one we shot through the bottles, and that was really basically just to show how interesting interactive foreground can be, and how once objects become obscure to the point of not knowing what they are anymore, such as transparency objects such as glasses and things like that, it can become rather wonderful elements, and you can use the same as we have a lot of glass in the hospital at house, and you can often rack from reflections of people on glass through to another scene going on, and use all of those sorts of elements, because I think what makes for very, very boring filmmaking is just stuff that's always at a distance, and you're never in amongst it. You know, the camera doesn't move too much. It makes for very boring and extremely bland photography. So using reflections and racking focus and from one thing to another can completely shift the emphasis of a shot from something that was basically quite normal and then suddenly became rather threatening, or vice versa. You know, so all of those sorts of elements are very important, and that long lens shot was to illustrate just how you can use foreground in an interesting way, and you know.
Gil, Alex Z in the chat room had asked, what is the relationship with the actors or the artists as the DP? Do you have a close relationship with them, or?
You kind of have to, because we spend more time together than we do with our families because we work such long hours. So it's kind of terribly important to get on with the actors really well. You know, there's often not a lot of communication because you don't want to be going blah, 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 blah to an actor when he's kind of mentally kind of getting into the part, and especially somebody like Hugh Laurie, who is such a serious actor that takes things so seriously and works very, very hard on getting a perfect American accent, that you don't want to distract him. So conversation, you know, you always feel that this is either a good time or a bad time, but there isn't an awful lot of conversation, you know, but you're just sort of working partners in a way. You know, it's things like the way in which he walks with his cane are so unique that if we get a new camera operator in when we have an overlap day, they're not used to the fact that he suddenly disappears out of frame when he's walking down a corridor because he lurches over to one side, you know. You know, just little things like that. You know, you begin to understand about an actor's mannerisms and the way in which he's likely to move, and I mean, it's very important to have, you know, a relationship that sort of works in that way.
Great, thank you. So a question from SFO, and you've talked about this a little bit, but what skill or knowledge did you develop as a still photographer that has been the most valuable in your career as a cinematographer? And basically, SFO is saying, as a still photographer looking to transition into video, what skill should he hone?
You know what? I'm going to let Stephen answer that because I already answered that. You can answer that one.
Yeah, just looking for your composition. I mean, you're getting the same characteristics, you're just shooting moving pictures instead of still. I mean, there's a couple little things that like as of like f-stops to t-stops, and, you know, profiling your pictures to using, you know, cinema profiles and then digital film and, you know, editing. They're just different tools, but they almost act the same. You just kind of got to learn just a different like tool set. But once you have like the vision and like the composition and know how to like work all the cameras, it's kind of the same.
Gil, is doing motion video, is that something that's a hobby for you as well as your job? Do you go home and video your family, or when you go to the park, or how do you separate those two?
I have made a couple of little independent films, but I need a little bit of I couldn't do it on the same day. I mean, it's like, you know, the hours we work on a TV production are just too intense to sort of think about that kind of thing. You know, so, but during my breaks, I mean, here I am teaching a workshop. I mean, so you can tell, that tells you something about how much I love the medium. You know, otherwise I'd be sitting on a beach somewhere, probably in Brazil.
He's going to transition into a 16 by 20 photographer.
Yeah.
We got the 16 by 20 at the lab. So we'll be doing workshops on that soon, as soon as we find out where to get film.
Well, Gail, I think it's been an amazing day. I think we've all learned a ton. It's been great. Thank you so much for day
Cool.
one of the Creative Live workshop.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. I'd actually like to thank our wonderful class here. I think they've thrown their hearts and souls into what we did today, and I think it was really great. So, fantastic, you guys.
No, you guys did well. I mean, better than a lot of people. We've seen a lot of people, especially with the glide cam.
Yeah.
I know it seems like it's hard, but like you'll pick it up. You just got to have it.
Nice work.
Great.
Everyone, thank you so much. Before we end today, I would like to take Gail, if I might hijack you for just a second, and have you talk about what we're going to do tomorrow.
Yeah, I
I've
just
got
need
a
a few
schedule
minutes.
here, so I'm not-
I'm just going to go and stretch my legs first. And,
Oh, well, we're still live.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're still live. So everyone's still watching, and I think they're gearing in to watch tomorrow. We want to give them a little bit of a taste. So I have the schedule here. I know
Right.
we're going to talk about shallow depth of field. Or do you know? Are you mentally prepared to talk about that, or do you want me to?
I think so. We're going to get into lighting tomorrow. We're going to talk about what makes the 5D special in terms of its depth of field, shallow depth of field, and basically get into some lighting scenarios and ideas for lighting. I mean, that's the major part of our day tomorrow, and our wonderful class here is going to get involved and get their fingers burnt on the lights and things, and so we've got a set that was constructed specifically for that, and it's going to be a little bit limited, but it's not like we've got a dungeon in the Bastille to light, but we're going to do our best and just explain basic principles of light and talk about contrast ratios and shooting with the 5D and and how you work lenses, how you construct a scene, how you break it down, what the reverses should be, crossing the line, all those sorts of things, if that makes any sense. So,
Makes perfect sense.
No.
Yep. Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. Fantastic.